Hello and welcome to the next part in our GameMaker series for beginners. Now, in today's part we will be adding a background to our game, because at the moment what you should have is a character that's animated with various sprites, can move left and right, and is constrained to the left and right of the screen. Can't jump, can't do anything else, and there's no background. So we had a request from one of our students to add in background, so we thought, okay, let's do that in the next lesson or the next video. So this is quite a straightforward one, so hopefully it shouldn't take us too long. Now, the first thing we need to do is look at what we're actually doing and explain a bit. So a parallax background, which is what we're going to add, we're not just going to add a static background. A parallax background is where the foreground of the game appears to move faster than the background, the further back images, if you like. So here's an example. If you look, the buildings in the foreground are moving faster than the building in the background. It gives you kind of a nice 3D effect, and generally in a lot of scrolling or platform games you'll see this kind of effect. Now, the way it's being done is through different background images. So I have on this tab an example of what you'd have. You'd have multiple background images which are probably essentially the same width, but they don't necessarily have to be the same height, and a bunch of them will be transparent, and you'll basically move the ones in the foreground faster than the ones in the background, so it'll look like you've got this kind of 3D effect. So let's get started. First, close the game down. What we need to do first is to actually get our backgrounds and create some sprites in GameMaker, because we've only got our character sprites at the moment. So you can go to Open Game Art or other places and download some free backgrounds. I have some here that I'm going to put in. So for these 7 layers I'm going to put in. So this means I will need to create 7 sprites. So let's go ahead and do that. I went ahead and used the duplicate feature, Command D, I expect Control D on Windows, which means that I just need to go ahead and rename these now. Okay, now we're going to import the images. Okay, now we are going to add some background layers, because it's all very well having sprites, for the backgrounds, but we actually need to create background layers in the room so they'll display as backgrounds. So as you recall, in our room or room editor, we have an instances layer where you put all your objects, your player, your enemies, all the little things in the game, and you have a background, which is usually at the moment just a static background which we've done nothing with. But now we're actually going to create multiple backgrounds, 7 in fact, and assign the sprites we just added. So let's do that. The background layer properties underneath has a button where you can assign the sprites. So first we change, let's rename this, and let's keep the same naming conventions. Remember, I keep going on about naming things well. Well, name it the same as your sprite. Don't name it like this, because you won't really know what you're talking about if you come back to this game. So name it BG1 Sky and assign the sprites BG1 Sky. There we go. So now we just create 6 more backgrounds and name them and add the sprites, or assign the sprites. Now this distant clouds one, I'm going to actually lift them up with my offset. So I'm going to put -200 here, so they're up here. Pretty handy. Let's carry on. The other thing you need to know is the foreground layers have to be above the background layers in the layers, because the topmost one is the one that displays first on the screen, and the bottommost one is the one in the furthest background. And we're done. Let's run the game, see what it looks like. Okay, great, but we have a static background. That's not really what we want. The next thing we need to do is to consider the viewport and the camera. Now, the viewport is really what you see when you play the game, all in one go. It's kind of the window that the playable area, if you like. And often in games like these, you can sort of scroll to the left and right, and as you move, you see more of the playable area. And that is like someone looking through a camera and seeing through the viewfinder the rectangle view that you see through a camera. And as you move the camera left and right, you can see more of what you're looking at, more of the scene, if you like. So we can set up a camera and a viewport in GameMaker as well. So all we need to do is pretty easy. You can code this to get really fine-grained control of the camera system. It's pretty complex, but you can also set it up really easily, and that's what we're going to do right now. So at the bottom, of the room editor, you can make this window a bit bigger, or make this part of the window a bit bigger. You have viewports and cameras here. So if you just drop that down and enable viewports, you've actually got a whole bunch of viewports, which means you could have quite a complex game. We only want one viewport though, and I just thought of something. The images actually are 2048 pixels, so we are actually going to resize our room as well. So let's do that first. So room width should be 2048. Height is the same. Excellent. So enable viewports and make viewport 0 visible, and set the viewport to 640, and set the camera and the viewport, sorry, to 640 by 720. And there you can see, actually I don't think we can see the whole image, so if we can just click on that, there we go. So you can see that I resized the room, it's a lot bigger, and you can see the viewport that you will see as well. Now the other one thing we need, or a couple of things we need to do, as the camera moves, we want the camera to actually follow the player. So it's more like as the player moves, we want the camera to follow the player. So you can say object following in the camera, in the viewport properties here, and choose Obj Dino. And you can have a border around the player as well. So the camera will start moving when that border is a certain number of pixels. So we're going to say, because the room is about 640, or the viewport is 640, we'll say about 300. So he'll probably move like 20 pixels, and then the camera will start moving. So he's got this sort of 300 pixel buffer around him, and I might need to just adjust him as well in here. So select instances as well, put him in the middle. Where is he? 3035. Lift him up a little bit. 562. Be able to set this exactly here. A little bit small. I'm going to put him at 544 right there. Okay, so that's nicely set up. So now let's run the game and see what we get. Okay, so we've got the viewport 640 by 720. As we move, we've got this 300 pixel buffer, and we've got not quite a scrolling background. So that's an interesting one. So he stops there, and I believe that's what we've got in our code at the moment, is doing that. So let's have a look. And that should be in movement for the player. So let's have a look there. Step. Yes, so we've constrained the player to 1248, so we should probably need to do 2048 minus 32, which is 216. Let's try that. I need to put that here as well. Let's try that. Let's see if that works. And if that works, all we have to do then is get the backgrounds moving at different speeds. Okay, perfect. Let's go the other way. Perfect. Okay, so the final part of this video is going to be coding the backgrounds so that they move at different speeds as the player moves. Right, so in the final part of this video, we're going to code our backgrounds so that they move. The first thing we need is a step event in our game object. So let's create one of those. Now, so what we're going to do in a step event is we're going to animate the layers at different speeds. The first thing we need is to get all of the layers as variables, as object variables. So if you imagine we're going to get 5 of the layers. I'll explain in a minute why. So we'll need 5 storage containers, that's our variables, and we'll need to fill those storage containers with the coding equivalent of the actual background layers. So we're going to get the background layers as actual coding objects, which is quite an interesting concept. So we don't need the ground layer and the sky layer because they will go at the normal speed. As you just saw when I ran the game last time, everything went at the normal speed. We want to actually slow the rest of the layers down. So we're going to go layer 2 to layer 6 and leave layer 1 and 7 to do their own things. So let's create some local variables. Remember the difference between local property and global variables. Local variables will only stay in existence inside this step event here. We can't access them from outside. We don't need to. We only need them to be in the step event. Okay, so we need the layer get ID function, which is one of the things I love about GameMaker, is it has IDs automatically for everything. You know, when we're coding, building databases and coding and doing all that sort of stuff in a native language or just from scratch in any language, you always have to create IDs for everything. It's such a pain in the backside. Anyway, I'm not doing that now. Haha. So my layers. So this is where you use the layer names. Okay, so you should be looking at Room Editor or your layer names. Okay, and this is where you'll thank me for naming conventions, because you can find ways of doing this stuff really quickly. For instance, copy and paste. So layer 3, 4, 5 and 6 done. 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm not sure, I can't do multiple cursors in this one, so I just have to delete bit by bit here. 4, 5, 6, and we've got, what have we got? Near clouds, hills, distant trees, near trees. Okay, that's the easy bit. The next bit involves something called linear interpolation, and that I'm going to show you what that is in a second. But what we are essentially doing here is using a function called layer X. And what I might do is pull that up on the screen. Did you know if you press F1 on any function, usually functions in GameMaker will appear in this orange color. if you put your cursor in the function and you press F1, you will get the manual come up. Mine just came up on a different screen, but it comes up with the function and tells you what it does. So this particular function says this: you can use this function to set the X position of the layer. Okay, so that's moving the layer around within the currently scoped room. You supply the layer ID, which we've already got, and the function will move the layer the given number of pixels along the horizontal axis of the room. So it's going to move the layer in the horizontal, okay? And then the X position to set the layer is the second parameter of the function, okay? So we'll need to work that out by this thing called linear interpolation. So what is linear interpolation? Okay, that's what we're coming to now. So, linear interpolation. Imagine you have 2 points on a graph, or plane, if you like. And you can draw a straight line between those points, and you know that there is a given distance between those points. And let's say that that distance is 100%, or 1 if you like. Now, you can interpolate. Often you extrapolate graphs, don't you? And you say, if this is the graph, well, over this period of time, well, in the future, the graph's going to be up here or up there. If you remember doing like population curves and that sort of stuff in geography and stuff, but to predict the size of the population in the future. And this is kind of something that statisticians probably do all the time, this kind of stuff. Linear interpolation is interpolating between the 2 points. So if we wanted to interpolate a point which is 50% along the line, we can easily do that, because we essentially already have the distance, so we can do it. We can find any point along the line, 75%. There you go. So the way the backgrounds are going to work is that we're going to have a little character, and he's going to be essentially at the second dot, and as he moves, this dot is effectively at 0. So as he moves, this distance gets longer or shorter, and we're going to set each background at a different interpolated value. The further back the background, the higher the linear interpolated value, because it should be travelling slightly slower than the player, but the near backgrounds should be going faster, so they will be set back a lot further. So hopefully that makes sense. They look like they're travelling faster this way. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, getting back to the function itself, let's fill that in. So layer X. By the way, if you hadn't already noticed, when you start coding a function in GameMaker, you get the function at the bottom, and it tells you which parameter you're supposed to be putting in as you do it. So this is saying I'm supposed to be putting in the layer ID, so that's going to be layer 2. And then X. Now we need to work out X with a linear interpolation function, which is called lerp, which takes 2 values and the amount. So the 2 values and the percentage distance, or the decimal distance between them. So the 2 values are going to be, as I said, 0 and wherever the camera is at the time. So basically that means where the player is, because the camera's on the player. So the X value of the camera is essentially where the player is going to be at any one time, and we get that like this. Get view X all the way down here, and we get the camera we want, because in GameMaker there's several cameras, so we have to get the first one, which is view camera 0. And how long do we want the linear interpolated value? Well, for the first layer, or I should say the last layer, the distant clouds, we want to be quite far along. So we'll say 0.95. Okay, that actually may seem a little bit complex, but if you break it down bit by bit, you should be okay. Now, we want one of these for every single layer. Well, we want 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So let's just change these layer IDs, and then we just change these speeds. So we're going to say that's going to go 0.9 along, that's going to 8, that's going to go 6, and that's going to go 4, 5, let's say. Now, and that in theory should be it. Because as you know, this step event is going to execute on every frame. So in every frame, we're going to set each layer at a different position, depending on if the player's moving or not. So let's give it a go. I do believe that's working. You can see the clouds going pretty slowly, and you can see the near trees going pretty fast. I'm actually going to make this a little bit more extreme. So we're going to say the near trees are going to go 0.3, well, let's say 0.25, 5, 7.5, 8.5. Now let's try it. Okay, so the near trees are moving a lot faster now, seemingly. And that looks pretty dandy. So I'm gonna call it done. Hey. All right, so that was backgrounds today. Any questions, please send an email to support@nextgencodecamp.com.au or just leave a comment. And if you're feeling especially generous or magnanimous, as I should say, then please give us a like and subscribe. Thank you. We'll see you in the next part.